Hello, everyone. Hi, Steve. You might turn off your video and put yourself on mute. I'm going to make an introduction here, and then Kirsty will bring you on in a few minutes. Welcome, everyone, to Humanity Rising as we convene our third of 5 sessions on science and consciousness. We have been delving into the research on our first day that really kind of blows the mind at the power of intention, both before, during, and after random events generators, demonstrating that consciousness traverses all aspects of space and time. And then yesterday, we focused on children and how children, just in the natural course of things, have psychic capacities and intuitive and extrasensory faculties that they express very naturally, but then given the strictures of our scientific reductionist worldview and also religious worldviews, they learn to repress that which is naturally endowed to our species. And today we're going to return to the issue of consciousness and time, and this extraordinary flexibility that people with heightened states of consciousness experience in relationship to time. And I thought, because of the nature of time, I would bring in something that the ancient Greeks, and particularly the pre-Socratic Greeks, like Heraclitus in the 6th century BC, said about time. For the Greeks, time was not a phenomenon as much as an intelligence. And I think that's important for our conversations about time, to think of time as not just a chronology of space and motion, but that time is actually an intelligence. Time is an aspect of consciousness. And therefore, when our consciousness interacts spatially with time, we are actually interacting with a different dimension of consciousness itself. And that's what the ancient Greeks thought. And I think the latest researches of modern cosmology and physics and scientific inquiry are coming back to where we started over 2,500 years ago in ancient Greek. So I want to welcome everyone. I also want to just say, before I introduce Kirsty Allan, who was with us yesterday, that I'll be taking off to Washington, D.C. Tomorrow to take up my new accountability around the unidentified anomalous phenomena and the office that is being set up there that I will direct to interface with the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government around this extraordinarily momentous moment in human history, in our species history, where for the first time collectively we're being made aware that we are not alone and that extraterrestrial intelligences exist, and they've been present on planet Earth. They've been interacting in an accelerating way with people all around the world with such incontrovertible evidentiary manifestation and also frequency that the cat is now coming out of the bag. It's an extraordinary moment. And for Humanity Rising and Ubiquity University to be operating back in Washington, D.C. at this extraordinary moment is very exciting to me personally. And I look forward to reports that I'll be making now from Washington. But I raise it because what is now going to happen as the US government embarks on this 7-year process of releasing this evidence and so forth into the public domain, is that human consciousness is going to be challenged in unprecedented ways. So consciousness, time, space, intention, volition, synergy, synchronicity are all what's up for humanity. And we're being given every opportunity to embrace the collective shift in consciousness that we need to collectively make in order to come together in harmony as a species, stop killing each other, and for us to come together in harmony with the larger planetary ecosystem so that we can synergize with each other and with the planet as humanity, for the first time in its collective history, looks up to the stars and begins the most extraordinary journey imaginable of interacting as ambassadors of planet Earth to the larger galactic civilizations that are in the process of making contact with us. It's a beautiful moment. It's an exciting time. It's extraordinarily potentiated, and it's all about consciousness. It's in that spirit that I want to welcome back Kirsty Allan, researcher in consciousness, who was with us yesterday. She will be moderating the panel today, and then I'll circle back toward the end. So Kirsty, welcome, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you so much, Jim, and what an exciting introduction as well. Just the thought of you heading to Washington for that exact purpose. I just wondered that the expression "time will tell" just came to mind. It felt so apt for so many reasons. And I think everyone who's been waiting for these UAP revelations from official sources or otherwise have been saying this all along. Time will tell. And it's something I'm hoping later in our chat with Steve that perhaps we can riff a little on that idea. Time will tell. There's something very poetic, something multi-layered in that. But thank you. So thanks for having me back. And obviously, yeah, so you've seen me before. I'm Kirsty. And yeah, I'm all about consciousness, a bit obsessed. And it's my absolute pleasure to be here and to welcome Steve Taylor. This is a man who you just have to mention his name in a room full of parapsychologists, consciousness researchers, transpersonalists, and the room lights up just at the thought. Even today, I was speaking with a colleague and her eyes just lit up and she's like, "Oh, he's so lovely." And it's just, there is so much love for Steve Taylor. And that is probably for two reasons. It's so evident in his writing that he has the dual faculties of this brilliant intellect and this enormous heart as well. So bringing him into the picture now, he is a spiritual psychologist, author, speaker, poet, which really excites me. He's also a past chair of the transpersonal psychology section of the British Psychological Society. He will be speaking at Science and Consciousness conference this year on the subject of weird time, and has recently just launched a new book, Disconnected: The Roots of Human Cruelty and How Connection Can Heal the World, which is a topic that excites me as well, because it's that hopefulness about where do we go next, and perhaps time will tell. So I think it's about time I passed it over to see if we can begin with the presentation. What do we think?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Kirsty. Such a lovely introduction.
You're welcome. Yeah, there's so much to say, but then I thought I'd try and encapsulate it in something a little more poetic itself. And I did prepare a little haiku. I had a go at it, which I might keep for after, if I have a lull and what to say. But I think if you wouldn't mind, would you like to take over from here?
Okay, yeah. I'd like to begin by reading a poem, actually. That's why I put at my age, I'm starting to need glasses to read my poetry. Time is, I've always been fascinated with time, partly because, you know, in a very basic sense, time is illusory. I mean, we all know that the present is the only reality. We all know that the future does not exist. The future is just an idea in our minds. We just anticipate things that may come or may not come. And we all know that the past is gone. We all know that the past only exists in terms of records or in terms of memories. So we all know that the present is the only reality. But nevertheless, we all tend to live in terms of the future or the past. We all tend to let the future define us. We all tend to be preoccupied with fears based on future events which may not happen. And we all carry concepts from the past which interfere with our present behavior, which prejudice our attitude to people or to the events we encounter in our lives. And we actually spend very little time living in the moment. Even when we are in the moment, physically, we are always in the moment, but our minds are often straying into the future or the past. So I've always been fascinated by what would happen if human beings did truly learn the ability to be present. I've always been fascinated with how the world would change if human beings learned to be present, how our attitudes to one another would change if we learned to be present. And it's a very urgent question because so much conflict in the world is caused by past attitudes, by grudges and resentments which we carry from the past. And so much anxiety is caused by thoughts that stray into our present behavior from the future. And in particular, you know, a lot of social discord could be reduced and even completely alleviated if human beings learn to be present. On a day-to-day basis, often when we meet one another, we carry intentions based on future outcomes. We carry our ambitions based on future goals. And we also carry, you know, ideas from the past, preconceptions about people. So we often don't meet people in a state of pure presence, which causes a large amount of discord. So I'd like to read a poem which I often use to begin workshops and courses. It's from a book of poems of mine called The Clear Light. And it's called Meeting Purely in Presence. Let's meet without pretense, without hierarchies of status or artificial shows of respect, without trying to impress each other with our knowledge or charm or humor. Let's meet without fear of exposing our vulnerabilities, without being embarrassed by our need for love or pretending to be self-sufficient. Let's meet without the past, without letting our urge to connect be obstructed by old resentments, without letting our natural empathy be blocked by hard, fixed prejudice. Let's meet without insecurity, knowing we don't have to prove that we're worthy of each other's affection, since love doesn't need to be earned or gained, but simply allowed to flow. Let's meet without intentions, without any designs or goals, knowing we don't have to try to relate to each other because we're already related. Knowing that there's nothing we need to do except allow ourselves to be. Let's meet purely in presence, without any conditions or concepts, knowing that in essence, we are the same, and that in being, we are one. When we enter a state of presence, one thing that happens is that we become naturally connected to each other. We feel our natural connection. And you can sense this every day in your relationships. If you have a partner, or when you're with close friends or relatives, particularly if you've known somebody for a long time, there may be a tendency to take that person for granted, to not really listen to them when they're speaking about their issues or their hopes or fears, or just what's happened to them during their daily life. You might find your attention wandering off and thinking about what's going to happen to you tomorrow, or what you want to do this evening. But our companions, they can always sense that, even if only unconsciously. They sense that they are not being respected through our attention. And it creates a subtle discord. It creates a sense of separation that leads to discord in a relationship. On the other hand, if you are fully present to your companion, if you give them your full attention, it's a sign of respect, which they can sense, if only unconsciously. And it creates a harmony between you and them. It creates a connection between you and them. So discord and disconnection stem from that state of absence, that state of abstraction, or self-absorption when we are not present to our companions. So maybe let's just for a moment, let's maybe close your eyes for a few minutes or a few seconds. Maybe just close your eyes and let's feel the connection between us all at this very moment. Let's allow any thoughts to pass away from the surface of our minds. Maybe you can sense a flow of associations on the surface of your mind, but just allow yourself to fall or dive beneath the surface of your mind, below that flow of associations, into your deep being. Into your deep being, where there are no concepts, no ideas, there's just pure inner space, pure consciousness. Just like a diver who dives below the surface of the ocean and suddenly finds themselves in the midst of stillness and openness in the deep ocean. You can sense that in this deep space of your being, there is no personal identity. There is no individuality. You can sense that this pure consciousness is shared by everybody. It's the essence, the deep essence of everyone's being that flows into us from the universe. So in this deep space of your being, you can feel the connection between us all right now. You can sense that we're all sources of the same, we're all channels of the same source, the same pure consciousness, flowing into us bringing us all into oneness. So let's just feel that deep connection and the deep essence of our beings right now. And now let's allow ourselves to return to the surface of our consciousness, just like a diver returning to the surface of the ocean. But as we return, we can sense those depths of stillness. We can sense the essence of our being still as part of our awareness. We can also sense that the surface of our minds have become quieter and calmer. We can also still sense that deep connection between us all right at this moment. So now let's bring this exercise to a close and open our eyes again if you did close your eyes. When we do live in the present, when we give our entire attention and awareness to our experience right now, there's a feeling of coming home. There's a feeling of being right where we're supposed to be. I think maybe there are two reasons for that. One reason is that, we are returning to reality. Reality is our home. That's where we were born. This is a reality which we were born into and which we were meant to experience. We weren't meant to live in abstraction inside our minds. We were meant to live in our experience in this glorious, vivid, and beautiful world. But also, I think it's because we're also returning home to childhood, because children are naturally present. Children spend all of their time, particularly young children, they spend all of their time in a state of presence. It's usually only when we become maybe 10 or 11 years old, when we move towards adolescence, that's when children start to live inside their own minds rather than in the world. But young children live in this amazingly vivid reality, giving all of their attention and awareness to their experience. There's a really beautiful poem that I love by William Wordsworth. It's called Intimations of Immortality. Maybe some of you have heard of it. One of the most beautiful poems in the English language. And in that poem, he describes how young children live in this heavenly state. He says that they see the world apparelled in celestial bliss. He says, heaven lies about us in our infancy. But he also describes how later in life we lose, he compares it to traveling inland away from the shore, away from this beautiful ocean. The further inland you travel, the more you lose touch, the more you forget the beautiful ocean from which you emerged. And I think that's true. I think childhood is a heavenly place. mainly because children live in this amazing state of powerful presence. But we can recapture that. I think one of the tasks of spiritual development is to recapture that state of pure presence. And as I say, I think when we do recapture it, we do feel this sense of coming home, this sense of belonging, a sense of harmony that emerges from being where we are meant to be. There's also a sense of freedom in presence too. Partly because we are becoming free of the future, free of the past, free of all of the anxieties which come from the future, free of the resentments and the sense of guilt which may come from the past. So I'd like to read another short poem now based on the power of the present to release us from anxiety. This is called the clear light of the present. And it hopefully conveys the freedom, which I was just talking about, the freedom to renew your life by living in the present moment. The clear light of the present. There's nothing that can't be undone. No past injury that can't be healed. No past mistake that can't be corrected in the clear light of the present. Every past action that arose from spite can be redeemed by kindness in the clear light of the present. Every action that arose from ignorance can be redeemed by wisdom in the clear light of the present. Painful memories of suffering evaporate like patches of fallen rain in the clear light of the present. Even dark, deep imprints of trauma will uncover themselves so that they can be healed in the clear light of the present. Conflicts that have exhausted us, grudges that have poisoned us for lifetime after lifetime, can be swept away in an instant of pure compassion and forgiveness in the clear light of the present. There's no need for the past to shadow us when we always live and are always free in the clear light of the present. Maybe just for a moment now, maybe let's just sense the clear light of the present all around us. Just look around your room and maybe take the perspective of a young child. Young children are so exhilarated and excited by ordinary phenomena which adults take for granted and don't really pay attention to. But just look around your room, just taking in the strange reality of all the objects around you, thinking beyond any concepts of names, any labels, just taking in the isness, the suchness of all of the phenomena around you. As if you've never seen any of these objects before. You can also touch the objects around you, feeling the strange textures, the smooth or rough surfaces. You can also examine your own body, your hand, for example. Although we should really forget the word hand and just think of this as a strange, tentacled protuberance. Where is this strange tentacled protuberance? All of these strange shapes and wrinkles and lines, strange textures. To me, it seems like there's always this world of isness and suchness. It's always present, this world of strangeness and fascination, all of this vivid reality. It's always there, but it's overlaid by names and concepts and labels, so we don't have access to it. But we're always free to enter into this world of isness just by changing our perspective, just by shifting our mode of perception. And that's when we can sense the clear light of the present shining all around us as a kind of radiance, a kind of freshness that naturally radiates from all phenomena. So in that sense, the present is the only reality. Life is just a flow of presence, like a river that we flow along with. And as we flow along with the river, we take in experiences, we experience encounters and events, all of them happening as we flow along with the present. But there's another perspective about time which interests me as a psychologist. And that's the idea that time does not really exist. Even in the present, even this flow of time that we experience from a different perspective, it doesn't really exist. And I became interested in this phenomenon about 10 years ago when I had a car accident. My wife and I were driving along I was driving along the motorway, as we call them in England, and I was in the middle lane, and I was overtaking a truck on the left side, but the truck didn't see us, and it tried to turn into the middle lane itself and clipped our car. So we started to spin round in the motorway. The truck hit us again, so we were spinning around. And as soon as the truck hit us, I shifted into another dimension. Everything became very quiet. I couldn't hear any sounds from the other cars or the motorway. I also became very calm. I had no sense of fear at all, even when we were spinning around in the middle of the motorway and the cars were heading towards us. But the most interesting, the most prominent feature of the experience was that time slowed down incredibly. There was a long pause between the car hitting us, and then I remember saying to my wife, "What was that noise?" It seemed like maybe 10 seconds had passed between the noise and me speaking. When I looked at the other cars, they seemed to be stationary. They seemed to be moving so slowly. They were stationary. And I felt as though I had endless amounts of time to try to correct the situation, to try to take some protective action, to try to, move towards the left side of the road, to try to apply the brakes, to try to shift in different directions. And eventually, within a few seconds of normal time, maybe 7 or 8 seconds of normal time, we crashed into the side of the highway. And fortunately, despite the even though our car was completely written off, it had to be scrapped, my wife and I were completely unhurt. But I would estimate that those 7 or 8 seconds in the car, they seem to stretch into maybe 2 minutes of normal time. So I began to do some research on similar experiences. I found out that many people have had similar experiences. Probably some of you have had similar experiences in car accidents or other emergency situations. So I started a research project collecting examples of what I call time expansion experiences. And I began to analyze them to find out what the most common types of experiences were, what the most common triggers of the experiences were. And I found out once I'd collected 100 or so of the experiences, I analyzed them and published a paper based on them. And I found that the most common type of TE, time expansion experience, was in the context of car accidents. And the second most common was in the context of falls. It could be a fall down a flight of stairs, a fall down the side of a mountain, or even just a fall onto the sidewalk. Even a fall which took maybe 2 seconds in normal time could stretch out into several minutes. Then I found the next most significant trigger was psychedelics. Many people reported an extreme expansion of time during a psychedelic experience. And other triggers were spiritual experiences, moments of intense mindfulness or deep meditation. And there were some other more minor triggers, such as trauma, being told bad news, tragic news, or being in the midst of a traumatic illness or a traumatic mental health episode. But interestingly, I found that in some experiences, people reported not just a time expansion, but a time cessation. So I also spoke in terms, I also have started to talk about time cessation experiences. Moments when time doesn't just slow down, it just seems to disappear. And in these moments, time seems to become spatial. And somebody mentioned in the comments there about a life review. And if you've read accounts of life reviews, time becomes spatial. It's almost as if all of the events of a person's life are laid out in a panorama, including future events too. Sometimes life reviews include events from the future. But it's as if linear time no longer exists and all of time collapses into this panorama or spreads out into this vast panorama. And that's why in life reviews, even though a person may only experience a few seconds of normal time, within those few seconds, they can experience a whole lifetime, years or decades of events, because they just survey them spread out in this panorama. These experiences are also a feature of near-death experiences. Often when people describe near-death experiences, they talk about how there is no more linear time. Somehow, everything seems to happen at once. Sometimes people describe it as being hard to get used to, this idea that all past events, all future events, all present events are taking place at the same time. So the conclusion I have come to is that what we experience as normal time is just a construct that's created by our normal psychological processes and functions. It depends on a normal state of consciousness. So when we wake up in the mornings and we're in a normal state, then we experience this fast-flowing linear time, which is just a normal human experience. But when we shift into altered states of consciousness due to an accident, which jolts us into a different state of consciousness, a state of deep meditation, or a psychedelic that we ingest, then we enter a different time world. The normal construct created by our normal psychological processes dissolves away. And suddenly we're in the midst of this expansive time world. Even a world in which all things seem to happen at once. And this is what mystics sometimes refer to as the eternal now, or the timeless moment. And interestingly, it's also referred to by many physicists. Many physicists from Einstein onwards speak about the block universe. And the block universe implies that time is spatial. The future is now. The past is now. In states of precognition, we can glimpse the future. In states of retrocognition, we can re-experience the past because it's all part of the present. So these are some of the exciting insights which are emerging from both from physics, from parapsychology, and also from examinations of altered states of consciousness. And none of it detracts from the importance of being present, because, you know, even if all time exists now, it doesn't mean that the future and the past exist apart from now. The future and the past are now. Everything is now. So we're just talking about a more expansive present, a present which includes all of time.
Thank you, Steve. That was amazing. It's phenomenal how, with your wizardry with words, you can affect a mild altered state of consciousness in people who are listening. So,
Maybe people had time expansion
I
experiences.
was going somewhere and I thought, oh, wait, back in the room. So yes, I wanted to just, rejoin the conversation a little bit to see, how we're getting on in the chats and if anyone has questions. And I just wanted to also thank you, Steve, for the strange tentacled protuberances, because this is never going to be the same again for me. that is stuck. And I thought it was beautiful in the first part of your talk today. You used a lot of words beginning with re, and that really struck me. They just seem to flow: return, recapture, release, renew your life, be redeemed. And I thought, that's beautiful. That's speaking to this sense of oneness, this returning, this reconnection. And I'm quite a visual thinker, and I had this visual of, well, we think of time like a clock, don't we? We tend to think of it as incremental. So whether it's minutes, whether it's hours, days, weeks, years, decades, eons, and so on. But really, what we're talking about time here is a dimension of oneness. And I wondered if you had any thoughts around that, about, separating. It's almost like having a duality, isn't it? Having this incremental conceptual way of thinking about time, and yet the experience of it is actually oneness.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think perception of time is related to separation. I think even you can go back to childhood. Like when children begin to think in terms of time, they also begin to develop separation. Once we divide our experience into minutes, hours, or days, then we also begin to divide ourselves from reality. We also sort of retreat from reality. And when we step out of time, we also transcend separation. We transcend our self-boundary, and we unite with the world. And that's always a timeless, it's either a time expansion experience or a time cessation experience. Because I think in some sense, time is created by boundaries, by our self-boundary.
Yeah, it's remember it being one of the big questions when I was first studying psychology was, how do we have this understanding of the self? And one of the kind of biggest arguments was just, well, there's this consistency over time. And it's like, well, what does that mean? You know, who you were when you were 10 is certainly not the same person when you're 40 and making very different choices in life, even to the point where every cell in your body has been replaced. You're physically not the same person. So what is this sense of self? And perhaps time is a way for us to construct that self or to recognize the self, maybe on one level, which would perhaps be replicated on that macrocosmic level of oneness again, of unity. But you mentioned retro and precognition, which I've got on my notes because that's my bag. And I wondered too about time in dreams. You know, when we dream, we have this kind of curious sense of time as well. And dreams might only be lasting a minute or two, but they feel like, you know, you've been in there a week, right?
Yeah, that's right. And of course, most precognition takes place in dreams, doesn't it? I think, you know,
a lot,
I read somewhere that 80% of precognitive experiences take place in dreams.
Right.
Yeah. So to me, it further emphasizes that our normal sense of linear time is created by our normal consciousness, our normal waking consciousness is created by, you know, the psychological processes which operate when we feel normal, in inverted commas. But obviously sleep is a form of altered state. It's an altered state of consciousness. You know, everything about our consciousness changes in sleep. So we have the potential to step outside time in sleep. We can experience massive time expansion, which people do sometimes in dreams, or we can glimpse the future, you know. So we transcend those boundaries, and in transcending our self boundaries, we transcend the boundaries of linear time.
We have a question here as well from Shannon. What benefits are derived from knowing that all is now?
What are the benefits? I think there are lots of benefits. It's beneficial. I mean, I'm not sure if are you talking about being entirely present in the now, or just sensing that all is now, maybe the past and the future are part of the now?
Well, there's a follow-up part. It's she says oneness would be a real benefit. No separation could result from no segmentation of time, living like a child, moved by what one does. That's lovely, actually. It's a lovely way to put it, Shannon.
Yeah, I think the question is really, are there any benefits to living in time? Apart from, you know, keeping appointments and deadlines, which in itself is not always beneficial. I don't think there are many benefits to living in time. I guess, you know, I'm being facetious. We need to plan for the future. We need to learn from the past. But real harmony can only come from living in the now. You can only really have harmonious relationships if you exist in a state of presence to the people around you. You can only have harmony in your activities if you are fully present to them, if you're giving your full attention to them. You know, if you're cooking while you're thinking about the future, then A, the meal isn't going to be very good. And B, you're not going to enjoy the process of cooking. But, you know, if you do cook in a state of presence, it becomes rewarding as an activity. And you also become much more capable because of the awareness that you give to the activity.
Yeah, I often find that with flow states, when you're just feeling very connected to what you're doing in the moment, cooking or any kind of creative activity, which is basically doing anything, it's all some form of creativity. When you have that feeling of presence, what you're making becomes an extension of your consciousness almost. It's like, you know, you're putting consciousness into it, weaving with it, rather than having this sense of separation between what you're doing and the thing you made.
Yeah.
Sense.
Yeah, that's true. I remember somebody saying that about the value of handicrafts and, you know, using your hands to make things. And I remember reading somewhere that if you,
you mean?
Yeah, these 5 tentacled protuberances, they can be very useful, these tentacles.
It doesn't quite roll off the tongue, does it? The 5 tentacle.
That's probably why they invented the word hand. Yeah.
Indeed.
But yeah, I think when you do make something by hand, you invest your life into it, your energy and awareness into that object. Whereas if it's mass produced by a machine, it obviously doesn't have that. So there's something lacking. There's something much more precious about things which are made by hand and which are invested with energy and awareness.
Yeah, perhaps awareness, that's one of the key words, isn't it? It's when we talk about healing and when we look across therapy and healing modalities, something I have an interest in professionally as well. All the efficacy is in that presence. It's in the taking something from the past or worries about the future and reconciling them in the now. It's bringing them into, conscious awareness and that kind of integration process. So it's embedded almost in even in our Western ways of addressing healing and self-improvement and things like this. But it's interesting that we don't really talk about time. We talk about the therapies with their very clinical kind of terminology. I'm wondering if there would be a way to help the statutory world of therapy to engage more with these ideas, because the language is so important, as you clearly demonstrated. Prosaic language doesn't carry meaning, but the poetic language meaning and creates meaning and therefore more meaningful, more powerful. So
yeah,
put that on your list, put that on your to-do list. Yeah, like sort out the world of therapy. Okay,
okay, I'll do that. Yeah, we
you.
can replace the word mindfulness with awareness. I think that'd be a start.
Excellent. Love it. Okay, so we have a question here from Diana. Do you have any experiences with the fairies, gnomes, or nature spirits?
Not really. I do feel a strong sense of connection to nature. I love to just walk in forests or woods or on the hills. And when I'm there, I do feel a tremendous sense of presence. I feel like the trees become sentient beings. I feel like there are sentient beings around me. I wrote a poem a couple of years ago, actually, about, I went into the countryside to feel alone because I wanted to be alone. But when I got into the forest, I realized I wasn't alone. There were no human beings, but I sensed presences all around me, the presence of the trees, and maybe that's in those moments I am sensing other presences, other entities, but I'm not consciously aware of them. One state I really enjoy is the hypnagogic state between sleep and wakefulness. I think that's a really fruitful state of consciousness. And I can feel really blissful in that state and have some quite unusual experiences. Sometimes I feel as though I'm slipping out of time and reconnecting with events that happened 20 years ago or 30 years ago. But occasionally, also in that state, I sense presences, obscure presences somewhere nearby. It's very difficult to explain, but I sense somewhere in that state there are presences hovering in a group nearby. I sometimes think, are they spirits of some form? I'm not sure, but that's that's my closest experience of spirits.
So much to explore in that alone, isn't there?
You
mentioned trees there, actually, and I think quite often trees get a little bit overlooked in the parapsychology and consciousness literature and these kinds of studies, because of course trees they experience weird time, don't they? Because like if you walk through a forest, then we're kind of in this liminal space where we're in between the canopies and the roofs of the trees, so to speak, and their roots below us. And time is occurring in different ways, from what's going on at the roots to what's going on the tops. But also some of these huge ancient trees, they can be kind of alive and dead at the same time, as far as we're concerned, because their dying process, could long outlive our entire life cycle. So there's really interesting, nuanced ideas, I think, around time with trees and work and the deep interconnectedness, mycelia and all these things too. Bit of a tangent there, but yeah, trees. We had another question. So M. Monk is asking, without time, is there birth and death of anything or anyone?
That's a good question. Well, there are processes which take place, and birth and life and death are processes. But I think one of the issues, one of the human race's issues is that we divide time so rigidly. We divide birth and death so rigidly, and we think of death as this boundary where we will maybe no longer exist afterwards, or maybe we will exist but in a different form. But my personal view is that death is not really a boundary. I believe in some form of life after death. That's partly an intuition. It's partly an intellectual conclusion based on evidence from near-death experiences, from reincarnations cases, from after-death communications and so forth. So I feel that death is not a dramatic shift. It's not a boundary. It's not a dramatic change. It's a slow shift into a different state of consciousness, after which life will continue in some form. So I think of, life as just this process which will continue eternally, and a kind of ever-flowing river.
And that actually leads us into a really nice question here from Maura. Maura asked, how could we depict these thoughts visually? This was just at the end of your talk, really. So these thoughts, I'm not entirely sure if they're specific thoughts, or if it's thoughts around time and, as a concept, how can we depict it visually?
Well, interestingly, I was reading a study about precognition the other day for my new book that I'm writing about timelessness. And a parapsychologist asked a number of psychics how they conceive of time and how they can witness or glimpse events from the future. And the psychics described it in kind of visual terms. One of them said that it feels as though I'm standing in the middle of a stream and I just look to my right upstream and I see events from the future. Then I look to my left downstream and I see events from the past. They're all just there. Time is still linear, but the linearity of time is visible. She can see the future and the past at different points in the stream. And another psychic said that his feeling was that he was standing in the middle of a panoramic landscape, and all of the events were just there around him. And he just looked to the right and he saw events from the future. He looked to the left, he saw events from the past. But it was all just there. And if he wanted to, he could look straight down the line at the present. So that's, I guess, those two images, they're two different ways of expressing it.
And that's a similar question again from M. Monk was, is there a beginning and an end to anything?
That's a good question. Can I answer that with a poem?
But of course.
I answered that question in a poem, if I can find it. It might take me a second to find it. Yeah, I think there are only processes. And that's the title of this poem. Processes. The world isn't made up of objects or discrete events that stop and start. The world is made of processes that merge and feed and form one another in an endless dynamic flow. Listen. There are no isolated sounds, just flowing streams of noise that arise and pass through your awareness. Look. There are no individual sights or scenes. There's just the movement of forms through space, passing through your vision. Time isn't made of discrete moments that pass out of the present and into the past. Time is an endless flow of experience that never stops being now. The human race isn't made of individuals who live and die in separateness. We're expressions of the same essence, like waves on the surface of the ocean. We rise, take form, fade and fall as we pass through the process of life. Then we pass away and re-emerge as part of another process. So there is no beginning nor end. Everything flows and meets and merges.
Yeah, it reminds me of the dream time, the Aboriginal idea of the dream time, where, you know, out of the dream time, we get this creation story. And that actually relates a little to Hyacinth's comment sort of question here. She says, but in this dimension, we have days and nights with hours and minutes and seconds. In another dimension, there is no time. Some do transcend the boundaries and shift consciousness to the other. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts around that.
Yeah, that's true. Although, you know, I'm not sure that there is a clear boundary between those two realms. I think we can live in a state of time expansion, even a state of time cessation. You know, even while we negotiate the processes of days, you know, essentially we're on a tiny, beautiful globe, which is spinning through space. And so as the globe rotates, we experience the phenomenon of days, and months and years. So yeah, obviously we can experience that process, but we don't have to live in terms of tiny demarcations of time that create boundaries in our lives. You know, we can keep our focus on our present experience, even whilst at the same time being conscious of the expansive reality of the future and the past. Yeah, somebody mentions, Michelle has just said, semi-permeable membranes are we. I like that. That could be a poem. That could be a song or a poem. Yeah, it depends on how permeable we are, I think. You know, it's really when we have strong ego boundaries that we live in time and in separation. As we become more permeable, we open ourselves to timelessness.
That certainly makes me wonder more about how we interpret things like lucid dreaming. So when we can have these almost like dual awareness at the same time, you know, that you're in the dream world, dream realm, and yet also have an awareness of that you're in there. How that kind of blends together, and you know how time. I wonder if there's any studies done actually on time perception while lucid dreaming. That could be interesting.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Your list, okay? That's another one for your to-do list.
Yeah, I'll write that down.
Thank you. Let me know what you find. Okay. Yeah. And Annalise has asked, do you think dream is real, another dimension, and in the sense of our just getting used to being in multi-dimensions, stepping in and out?
I think it depends on the type of dreams. I think some dreams are a bit similar to associative mental chatter. You know, they're not particularly meaningful. They're just sort of the brain's way of organizing and processing experiences. But I think some dreams are meaningful. I don't know if anybody's ever made a distinction between different types of dreams, deep dreams or trivial dreams or shallow dreams. I don't know. But, you know, particularly, are you aware of anything like that?
I think culturally there's different interpretations of dreams, and, you know, certainly like things like vision questing, shamanic practices and things, you know, the dream world can take on different kind of meanings. But of course, there's certain kinds of rituals and certain kinds of expectations. But that is a really fascinating subject that
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, I am particularly interested in precognitive dreams, which seem to, many of which are genuine glimpses of the future. In some cases, they are warnings about the future. I mean, one interesting thing about precognition is that, it could be a warning to avoid a certain danger. There are cases where people have had dreams about falling off a horse, for example, and then the next day they see themselves in that situation. They think, oh no, there's a danger that I'm going to fall now. So they take care to avoid danger. So in those cases, it's not just a question of glimpsing the future. It's a question of a premonition of a danger that may arise. So you have the opportunity to change the future, which is also interesting.
Absolutely, and something I want to talk to you about. Another day to probe you for all you know about precognition. That being my area of research as well. So maybe time for just a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Yep.
So we've got Stan who's asking, do you have any ideas about the potential relationship between our sense of time and the sense of value that brings in the idea of money? The concept that time is money comes to mind.
Yeah. Interesting question. The concept of time as money is a product of, our materialistic society. It comes from dividing time and also placing value on segments of time or sections of time. It's obviously a very unhealthy concept that leads to a lot of stress and unhappiness. But I think really, as I expressed in one of my earlier poems, it's when we become present, when we stop living in the future, we stop directing our attention towards the future or the past. That's when we find the most value in the present. It's like the cliche that the present is a gift. It's a present because it's all we have, and it's incredibly valuable because it's a source of harmony and happiness. The future never brings any happiness. The future creates stress and anxiety. The past may bring a glimpse of previous happiness. It may give you a sense of nostalgia, but even nostalgia is infused with a little bit of pain because, your previous happiness is no longer present. And mostly the past is a source of unhappiness. It's a source of guilt and frustration and resentment. But in the present, there is only the harmony of pure experience. So that's where value lies.
Thank you. And Deanna has asked about morphogenic fields. She says, where imagery and dream states humans have been feeding. I'm not sure I'm getting all of that question correct. So if that could be clarified, maybe that'd be great. But yeah, do you have any thoughts on morphogenic fields or morphic resonance and time and presence?
I'm aware of Rupert Sheldrake's work. Funny enough, I was at a conference recently in Norway where somebody had tried to find scientific validation of the concept of morphogenic fields. There was kind of like a mixed picture. They weren't really sure whether they had positive results. But yeah, I mean, it seems to make sense. The idea that human consciousness is collective. We are all interrelated. So every individual affects the collective in a small way. And the more that a particular type of behavior builds up resonance, the more effect it has, until eventually it may reach a certain threshold where it becomes normal human behavior. I think of that sometimes in terms of spiritual awakening. I personally think that there is a rising wave of spiritual awakening in the world. And I think that as more people gradually awaken, it makes it easier for others to awaken. The momentum of wakefulness builds up. And eventually, maybe there will be a threshold where wakefulness becomes the human race's normal state. Maybe in a few decades or so, if we are still around to undergo transformation.
And so how would you encourage people to cultivate presence then, Steve? Obviously, other than reading and perhaps penning some poetry.
1 second, I'm just replying to a comment in the book, in the chat box. Well, there are many ways. I often lead workshops where I guide people through exercises. I encourage people to return to the childhood state. I encourage people to identify the strategies they use to be absent, because everybody has certain strategies they use to be absent, to move away from the present into the future or into a state of abstraction. I encourage contact with nature. You know, it's a great way of cultivating presence. Also, awareness of the body. You know, the interesting thing about the body is that it's always present. You know, you are born, the body is born in presence, and it continues to be present all through our lives. So even if our minds are absent, our body is always in the now. So as soon as you give your awareness to your body, you rejoin it in the now. You know, so the body is a tremendously useful vehicle. Amongst other things, it's a really helpful vehicle that brings us back to presence.
Thank you. And of course, for anyone who hasn't visited Steve's website yet, there are online courses available there as well, where you can engage with experiential learning on presence and awakening. I would really encourage you all to check that out as well. And so I'm just wondering, Steve, is there anything else you would like to share with us today, or do we have any other burning questions? And if not, I would just like to offer my rather poorly penned haiku to sum up our experience. In the spirit.
Well, the only thing I'd like to say maybe is that on the subject of humanity rising, I do believe that humanity is rising, but at the same time we are recapturing, you know, a state of wellness and wholeness that we lost. You know, I think we had this state as children. I think early in the history of our species, we lived in this state of wholeness and wellness as well. So I think rising is a reintegration with our previous selves. And presence is a big part of that. The more we are present, the more we undergo a natural spiritual unfolding. So just being present in your experience for a few moments is a really helpful practice that cultivates your natural wakefulness and helps it to grow.
Thank you. And of course, you will be speaking at the Science and Consciousness Conference in November at Broughton Sanctuary on the weird time, of course. So, you know, encourage everybody to come over and experience that with us. I'll be there offering some flotation experiences as well with a time theme.
Sounds great.
Get you in there too.
Hopefully.
But just before perhaps Jim rejoins us, I wanted to just say on the subject of time will tell, and that precognition has been quite an important topic today. And so maybe last night, as I was emailing you, maybe I was having a precognitive moment, because this was my little haiku in your honor. Steve Taylor joins us as a moment unfolds and peace suggests new faith. Now, I don't need it to be graded or anything. I don't even know if I got it right, but beautiful. I tried, and that's the main thing.
No, it's beautiful.
So, yeah, so unless there's anything else that you would like to say, please just check out Steve's website. I've posted it a few times in the chat. Books, events, all sorts of things. And of course, if Steve's got anything else you'd like to mention now. Otherwise, we'll see if Jim would like to rejoin.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Kirsty. Marvelous session. Reminds me of Eckhart Tolle and his, constant admonition to be here now, to take a phrase from Ram Dass, in the 60s. It's an extraordinary thing that's all we really have is ongoing present moments, but we keep being captured by either the past or the future. as you pointed out. So I really want to thank you for focusing our consciousness on the present of presence, and really acknowledge your mastery of that particular domain. So that brings us to a close, everyone. For today, you're all welcome to the after session chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. And tomorrow we'll deepen our exploration. Peter Mary will be back for tomorrow and Friday. But continue to consider as deeply as you can this question of consciousness and how all of us are now challenged in unprecedented ways to shift the octave of our conscious awareness to a much more harmonized state of being. And what it will take, how we will get there is unclear, but it's something that is up for humanity for all the reasons that we know. So thank you, everyone. Bye for now. See you tomorrow. Thank you, Kirsty.